Most people think they know what a gladiator was. They watched a movie, skimmed something online, maybe touched on it in a history class, and walked away with the impression that gladiators were just slaves thrown into an arena to kill each other, while the emperor watched in boredom. But here's the truth almost no one tells you. Gladiators were one of the most sophisticated and carefully engineered constructs in the entire history of Western civilization, and what happened in that arena was far more complex, more intelligent, and more revealing about human nature than any Hollywood movie has ever managed to show. Think about it. Rome built the greatest empire the Western world had ever seen, dominating peoples, cultures, and territories for centuries. Do you really think a civilization of that magnitude would leave its main public spectacle to chance? Every type of gladiator that stepped onto the sands of the Colosseum was designed with a specific purpose. Each represented an archetype, fulfilled a narrative role, and reinforced a political message. It was theater, it was propaganda, it was social control, all packaged into an experience that left the audience in awe. In this video, you're not just going to discover who these gladiators were, but why each of them existed and how this entire system fit into a much larger machine than most people realize. This isn't a surface-level summary of ancient history. It's a real in-depth analysis, the kind that very few pieces of content on this subject dare to deliver. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any stories. So sit back because this story is about to begin. When most people think of gladiators, the first image that comes to mind is blood, sand, and roaring crowds, as if it were just a brutal show meant to satisfy the Romans' taste for violence. But anyone who truly studies the Roman Empire knows that this view is, at best, superficial. Gladiatorial combat was a highly precise social mechanism where every detail was calculated with a very clear purpose. Rome didn't build the greatest empire in the Western world by being careless, and the gladiatorial games were no exception to that logic. Gladiators served three functions at the same time. On the social level, they were entertainment and political propaganda. The ruler who financed the games wasn't just entertaining the people, he was buying loyalty and displaying power. On the military symbolic level, the fights reenacted historical battles, placing Rome's enemies in the arena to be defeated in front of everyone. And on the psychological level, they functioned as mass control. A population entertained and captivated by ritualized violence has less energy to question the system. And that's exactly why each type of gladiator existed with a specific purpose. Each one represented an archetype: the disciplined Roman soldier, the conquered barbarian enemy, the skilled hunter, the technical specialist. It was militarized theater, where the script was already written before the fight even began. Understanding this logic is the key to understanding why the gladiatorial system lasted for centuries, and the next topics will reveal one by one who these characters were that stepped onto the sands of the Colosseum. If there is one gladiator who can be called the gold standard of the Roman arena, it is the Mirmillo. He was the central reference of the gladiatorial system. Heavy, imposing, and disciplined, embodying everything Rome admired in a warrior: solid protection, brute strength, and a direct, no-nonsense fighting style. His equipment said everything about what he represented. The large shield, the famous scutum, the same used by Roman legions, covered most of his body and functioned like a walking fortress. The short sword, the gladius, was built for close combat, efficient in tight spaces, and the helmet, with its fish-shaped crest, completed the image of a warrior who did not run from battle, he faced it head-on. But the Murillo's role went beyond combat itself. He was the mirror of the ideal Roman soldier. The entire system of gladiator matchups was built around him. Other types of fighters were specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses of his heavy armor. He was the king on the board, and the others were pieces created to challenge him in different ways. And you're about to understand exactly how that worked. If the Murmillo was brute strength and Roman discipline personified, the Threx was the exact opposite, and it was this contrast that made their clashes so fascinating. Inspired by the peoples of Thrace, a region that today corresponds to parts of Bulgaria and Greece, the Threx represented the cunning enemy Rome had fought and conquered. It's no coincidence that Spartacus, the slave who led the greatest gladiator revolt in history, is widely believed to have fought as a Threx before setting the Roman world ablaze with his rebellion. But what set the Threx apart was the engineering of his equipment. He carried a small shield and a curved sword called the Sika, a weapon of offensive brilliance. Its curvature allowed strikes to slip around an opponent's shield and hit areas a straight blade could never reach: tendons, neck, back. It was a weapon of indirect penetration, designed to win not through strength, but through intelligent movement. And this is where the Threx's fighting style reveals its brutal elegance: constant movement, attacking from the sides, exploiting blind spots. To those watching from the stands, it was like seeing a calculated predator dancing around a fortress, searching for the perfect opening to bring it down. And if the Threx challenged through cunning, the next gladiator took that concept to a level that was deeply unsettling by Roman standards. Of all the gladiators who stepped onto the sands of the Colosseum, the retiarus was the most unsettling to the Roman mindset. While all the others carried armor and helmets, the retiarus entered the arena with almost no protection, no helmet, no shield, with his face and body fully exposed. To a Roman accustomed to valuing military discipline, this bordered on absurd. However, the retiarus compensated for this vulnerability with a completely different combat philosophy. His arsenal consisted of a net, a trident, and a short dagger. The logic was simple and devastating: keep distance, cast the net to immobilize the opponent, and strike with the trident before they could recover. It was a phased, almost surgical style of combat, where a mistake at any stage could be fatal. And this constant tension made the retiarus a crowd favorite, even while being looked down upon by the Roman elite as a dishonorable fighter. The stands would erupt with every net cast, every dodge, every sudden shift in the balance of the fight. It was unpredictable, it was controlled chaos, everything a great spectacle needed to be. But if the retiarus was the hunter of the arena, Rome created an opponent specifically designed to hunt him in return. The secutor was Rome's ingenious answer to the retiarus, not just a heavily armored gladiator thrown into the arena to apply pressure, but the result of a carefully engineered solution. It was as if Rome had analyzed the problem and said, "We need a gladiator male-tailored to destroy this fighting style." The most fascinating detail was the helmet, completely smooth and rounded, with no crests or protrusions. What good was the retiarus's net if it simply slid off the helmet without catching? It was an elegant solution to a specific problem, showcasing the level of sophistication with which Rome designed their games. In practice, the clash of the two was one of the most electrifying in the arena. On one side, the secutor advancing relentlessly, applying psychological pressure. On the other, the retiarus retreating, controlling space, trying to create the perfect opening. It was predator versus prey, but no one truly knew who was who until the very end. And speaking of gladiators who represented conquered peoples, the next one carried the weight of one of the greatest civilizations Rome ever faced. Few peoples influenced Rome as deeply as the Greeks, and few were so skillfully humiliated in the arena. The hoplomachus was the living representation of this contradictory relationship. Rome admired Greece, copied its art and philosophy, but needed to make it clear, in front of thousands of spectators, who ruled the known world. Inspired by the feared Greek hoplites, his equipment reflected that heritage: a long spear for distance fighting, a round shield for control in mid-range combat, and a short sword as a final option. He was a layered gladiator, requiring not only strength but tactical intelligence and sharp combat awareness. When the Hoplomachus was matched against the Murmillo, it wasn't just a fight, it was a staged historical reenactment for the masses. Rome versus Greece, the present versus the past, and the outcome was always crafted to reinforce Roman superiority before the entire Colosseum. But if the Hoplomachus represented the technique of a conquered people, the next gladiator abandoned tradition altogether and relied purely on the chaos of dual blades. If there was a gladiator who embodied the absolute chaos of war in its rawest form, it was the Demochairus. While most fighters balanced offense and defense, he made a radical choice. He abandoned protection entirely and entered the arena with 2 swords, one in each hand, betting everything on speed and offensive aggression. This choice required a level of technical skill that very few gladiators could achieve. The right hand delivered the primary attacks, while the left acted as both secondary offense and active defense, blocking strikes with the blade itself and keeping the opponent in constant imbalance. A mistimed move didn't result in injury, it meant immediate death. There was no margin for error, no shield, no second chance. For the Roman audience, watching a Demochairus was almost hypnotic. Speed, extreme risk, and relentless aggression created a level of tension that few other gladiators could replicate. He represented the chaos of war in its most brutal essence, and while the Demochairus pushed individual combat to its limits, Rome also knew how to impress on a completely different scale, bringing not just men but horses into the arena itself. The equites opened the gladiatorial games with immediate impact. Mounted fighters entered the arena at full speed, lances ready, cloaks flowing behind them. It was the Roman equivalent of a grand opening act, except with real risk of death. The fight unfolded in 2 phases. First, on horseback, using spears and mobility, then dismounted, continuing the battle on foot with the gladius. It was speed followed by intensity. 2 spectacles in one. The Desiderius took this concept even further. Inspired by British warriors who once surprised Julius Caesar himself, he fought from a chariot, the Esidum, cutting across the arena at high speed while hurling javelins. When the mounted phase ended, the fight transitioned to the ground, turning into direct combat and closing the spectacle with the intensity the crowd expected. Together, the equites and Desiderius represented something greater. They were living proof of the reach of Roman power, distant frontiers brought into the arena and transformed into entertainment. And now that you know each type of gladiator, it's time to understand how all these pieces fit into a system far bigger and far more calculated than it seems. After getting to know each gladiator individually, one thing becomes absolutely clear. Gladiatorial games were far more than a violent pastime. They were a system, a sophisticated form of social engineering designed from start to finish to fulfill specific functions within Roman society. The formula was elegant in its brutality. Contrast plus narrative plus technique plus risk equals maximum entertainment. Each matchup followed a narrative logic that the audience absorbed intuitively. Heavy versus light created physical tension. Roman versus barbarian created a narrative of superiority. Order versus chaos created emotional identification. It was militarized theater where gladiators were at once performers, athletes, and political symbols. And the emperor who funded these games wasn't just providing entertainment, he was consolidating power and reinforcing his position at the center of the Roman world. What makes all of this even more impressive is realizing that this system lasted for centuries because it tapped into something deeply human, the need for narrative, conflict, and resolution. Rome understood this before any other empire. Studying gladiators, therefore, isn't just about satisfying historical curiosity, it's about understanding how power works, how masses are influenced, and how a well-constructed narrative can be more powerful than any army. After everything you've just seen, one thing is impossible to deny. The Romans were far more intelligent than popular history usually gives them credit for. They didn't just create a spectacle, they built an entire system of narrative, power, and social control that lasted for centuries and still echoes in today's world. Now that you understand each piece of that system, you'll never watch a movie about Rome the same way again. You'll see the layers behind the surface. But now, I want to hear from you. Which type of gladiator surprised you the most? The retiarius, considered dishonorable by the Romans themselves but loved by the crowd. The demachirus, who gave up all protection and bet everything on speed. Let me know in the comments. And since we're talking about gladiators, if you had to choose a fighting style to face an opponent in the arena, which one would you pick? And look, if you made it this far, you've already proven you're not the kind of person who settles for shallow answers. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because the next story coming up is the kind that will make you call someone over to watch it with you. Rome still has many secrets left to reveal, and you won't want to miss out.